Picture this. You are a wildlife ranger in Queensland, Australia. It is a Tuesday. You have been called to relocate a koala that has wandered into a suburban area and needs to be moved back to suitable habitat before a dog finds it or a car does. Standard procedure. You have done this dozens of times. You approach the animal with the practiced calm of someone who has handled wildlife professionally for years, and you reach out to scoop it up in the approved handling position. The koala looks at you, not with the dopey, slow, unbothered expression that every koala photograph in existence has led you to expect. With an expression that communicates across the considerable gap between marsupial and primate cognition, something remarkably close to a decision being made. And then, before you have fully processed what is happening, the koala has deployed claws that are significantly longer and stronger than anything its soft, round appearance prepared you for, has latched onto your forearm with a grip that would be impressive in an animal 3 times its size, and is making a sound that can only be described as a large man arguing with a smaller man through a broken speaker at maximum volume while someone simultaneously steps on a cat. You are bleeding. You are also, somehow, still holding the koala. The koala is still screaming. A nearby resident has taken out their phone. This is going to be on the internet by evening. Welcome to the reality of koalas, the animal that the entire world has collectively decided is a symbol of gentle, sleepy, eucalyptus-scented Australian charm, and that is, in actual lived experience, one of the most aggressively misrepresented animals on Earth. The gap between the koala's public image and the koala's actual behavior, biology, and relationship with the humans who have to deal with it in any practical capacity is one of the most entertainingly dramatic mismatches in the entire animal kingdom. And exploring that gap, really digging into what koalas are actually like, why they are the way they are, what their biology actually involves, and why the people who interact with them most closely have a relationship with them that is considerably more complicated than the plush toy version suggests, turns out to be one of the most fascinating deep dives available in animal biology. So here is the full story of why koalas are, depending on who you ask and in what context, either deeply beloved or profoundly, specifically, personally resented. Both positions are defensible, both are based on real information, and understanding both requires starting at the beginning with what a koala actually is and what it has done to itself, evolutionarily speaking, over millions of years of very questionable biological decision-making. The koala, Phascolarctos cinereus, is a marsupial, meaning it belongs to the lineage of mammals that give birth to extremely undeveloped young and complete the development process in an external pouch rather than in a placenta. Australia's isolation from the other continents for approximately 45 million years allowed marsupials to diversify into ecological niches that elsewhere were filled by placental mammals, producing the extraordinary endemic fauna that makes Australia biologically unlike anywhere else on Earth. Koalas are one product of that isolated diversification, and their specific evolutionary trajectory has resulted in an animal whose biology is simultaneously impressive in its specialization and baffling in the specific trade-offs it has made. The dietary specialization of koalas is where the story of their biology begins, because everything else about them flows from it. Koalas eat almost exclusively eucalyptus leaves. Not eucalyptus as one food source among many, eucalyptus as essentially the entire diet, consumed from a relatively small selection of preferred species within the approximately 700 eucalyptus species that exist across Australia. This dietary choice, from a nutritional standpoint, is extraordinary for reasons that become clear when you examine what eucalyptus leaves actually contain. Eucalyptus leaves are, by the standards of available food sources in the Australian environment, a remarkably poor nutritional proposition. They are low in protein, they are low in digestible carbohydrates, they contain almost no fat. They have a high fiber content that makes extracting the limited nutrients they do contain a digestively demanding process. And they contain phenolic compounds and terpenes, the chemicals responsible for the distinctive eucalyptus smell that are toxic to most animals at the concentrations present in eucalyptus foliage. The vast majority of herbivores avoid eucalyptus leaves precisely because the toxic load exceeds their detoxification capacity relative to the nutritional return. Koalas have evolved a highly specialized liver capable of detoxifying eucalyptus compounds at rates that other animals cannot match. This is a genuine and impressive biological adaptation. But the cost of running a high-capacity detoxification system on a low-calorie diet is significant and shapes almost every other aspect of koala biology and behavior. The mathematics of koala existence are straightforward and brutal. The available energy from eucalyptus leaves, after the metabolic cost of digesting them and detoxifying their chemical content, leaves very little surplus for anything energy-intensive. Movement is energy-intensive. Thermoregulation is energy-intensive. Reproduction is energy-intensive. Social behavior is energy-intensive. The koala's entire biology has been shaped around minimizing expenditure in all of these categories to make the eucalyptus diet viable. The result is an animal that sleeps or rests for approximately 18 to 22 hours per day. Not because koalas are lazy in any meaningful evaluative sense, but because sleeping is the lowest energy expenditure state available, and the koala's caloric budget essentially mandates it. When koalas are not sleeping, they are primarily eating, which is the other low-cost activity available, and the one that replenishes the budget that sleeping conserves. Movement between trees happens but is minimized. Social interaction happens but is metabolically priced at a level the budget does not generously support. This is the biological reality underlying the famous koala sleepiness that has made them such a successful symbol of relaxed, unbothered living. It is not contentment. It is energy poverty management. The koala is not Zen. The koala is running an extremely tight metabolic budget on a diet that most nutritionists would describe, with considerable understatement, as suboptimal, and sleeping for 20 hours a day is how the numbers work out. The brain situation deserves specific attention because it is one of the most striking examples of evolutionary trade-offs in any living mammal, and because it has direct practical implications for koala behavior that contribute significantly to the complicated feelings their handlers develop about them. Koalas have unusually small brains relative to their body size, one of the lowest brain-to-body mass ratios among marsupials, and dramatically lower than would be expected for a mammal of comparable size. The brain does not fill the skull cavity. There is a significant gap filled with cerebrospinal fluid between the brain and the cranial walls in koalas, a feature that is unusual among mammals. The prevailing explanation for this is that brain tissue is metabolically expensive. Maintaining neural activity requires significant caloric investment, and that evolutionary pressure on the koala's tight energy budget has favored brain size reduction over deep evolutionary time. A koala with a larger, more metabolically expensive brain that consumed more calories simply could not balance the eucalyptus-funded budget as effectively as a koala with a smaller, cheaper brain. Smaller brains persisted. Larger brains were selected against. The result is an animal with cognitive capabilities that are limited in ways that are readily apparent in behavioral observation and that have specific practical consequences for anyone attempting to interact with koalas in controlled settings. Koalas are, to put this diplomatically, not fast learners. The behavioral flexibility that allows most mammals to adapt relatively quickly to novel situations, to learn from experience across a range of contexts, to modify behavior in response to environmental feedback. These capabilities are present in koalas at levels that reflect the neural substrate available. Koalas presented with their preferred eucalyptus leaves in a configuration they do not recognize as food-presenting often fail to engage with them. Koalas in care facilities sometimes have difficulty recognizing food placed outside the specific spatial context they have learned to associate with feeding. Koalas can and do learn, but the pace and flexibility of that learning is constrained in ways that their handlers notice, document, and occasionally express opinions about with the particular exasperated affection that develops for animals you care for intensely while finding their cognitive limitations specifically frustrating. The grip strength situation is where the koala's public image diverges most sharply from the tactile reality. Koalas spend their lives in trees, specifically in eucalyptus trees, with smooth bark surfaces and branches that require secure grip to navigate safely. The claws of a koala, long, curved, and backed by forearm musculature developed for sustained arboreal gripping, are tools optimized for maintaining position in trees across extended periods that include sleep cycles where the animal needs to stay put without active muscular effort. The gripping strength available to a koala is, for its body size, remarkable. This is entirely appropriate for an animal whose survival depends on not falling out of trees while unconscious for 20 hours a day. When that grip is applied to a human arm, It is a different experience than the plush toy softness of the koala's fur leads most people to anticipate. The claws penetrate. The grip does not release easily. The forearm strength behind the grip is more than sufficient to make removal without causing injury to either party a skilled task rather than a simple one. Wildlife handlers who work with koalas regularly have the forearm scarring that documents this reality. Tourists who have held koalas in the controlled conditions of licensed wildlife experiences have occasionally been surprised to discover that the transition from koala sitting calmly to koala expressing a strong opinion about the current situation can happen faster than the photo opportunity allows for. The vocalization dimension of koala reality is one that photograph and video media have historically underserved the public on, for the straightforward reason that the vocalization most strongly associated with koalas in distress is not one that lends itself to the charming wildlife content that drives social sharing. Male koalas during breeding season produce a territorial and mating call that is, acoustically, one of the most startling sounds produced by any animal of koala size. The bellows, which is the technical term, and the accuracy of that term should be noted, is produced by a specialized sound-producing organ called a descended larynx that koalas share with humans and a small number of other mammals. This anatomical feature allows koala bellows to reach frequencies and volumes that are dramatically disproportionate to what the animal's body size would suggest. Recordings of koala bellows are available online and are recommended for anyone who wants a rapid recalibration of their mental koala model. The sound is variously described as a large animal belching rhythmically, a motorcycle with mechanical problems, and a snoring contest conducted at inappropriate volume. It carries considerable distances through bush, which is its biological purpose, acoustic territorial advertisement across the male koala's home range. At close range, it is an experience. Wildlife staff at facilities housing male koalas during breeding season have developed opinions about this that are expressed during breeding season and reconsidered in the following weeks when the season ends and the facility returns to whatever passes for quiet. Female koalas produce a different vocalization, a screaming cry used in contexts of distress or rejection of male approaches. That is similarly dramatic for its size and similarly absent from the plush toy and postcard koala representation. The distress cry of a koala is the sound that most wildlife handlers have heard at close range and that most tourists have not. It is not the sound you would select as the audio accompaniment for a nature calendar photograph. It is the sound of an animal that has strong feelings and the vocal equipment to communicate them at volume. The chlamydia situation is one that comes up in any honest discussion of koala biology and population management, and that has contributed in the community of people who work with koalas in veterinary and wildlife care contexts to a complicated emotional landscape around the animal. Koalas have extremely high rates of chlamydia infection across wild populations. In some regions, prevalence in wild populations is very high. The chlamydia strains affecting koalas are species-specific and are not transmitted to humans through normal handling interactions, which is a clarification that wildlife handlers have to provide with some regularity. The disease has severe consequences in affected animals: blindness from ocular infection, infertility from reproductive tract infection, and a painful urinary tract condition colloquially called dirty tail that, in advanced cases, is debilitating. The treatment is antibiotic therapy, which is complicated in koalas by the fact that the gut microbiome required for eucalyptus digestion is highly sensitive to antibiotic disruption. Treating a koala for chlamydia with antibiotics risks compromising the microbial communities that make eucalyptus digestion possible, potentially creating a situation where the animal can no longer process its only food source. Managing this therapeutic dilemma is an active area of veterinary research, and the people doing that research and providing that care have a relationship with koalas that is deeply committed and simultaneously acquainted with the full complexity of what they are committed to. Vaccine development for koala chlamydia has been a significant research focus, with encouraging results suggesting that vaccination programs may eventually reduce wild population disease burden. The scale of delivering vaccination programs to wild koala populations, which are distributed across substantial geographic areas, which do not queue up cooperatively for health interventions, and which express the grip-based opinions discussed above when handled. is a logistical challenge that the researchers and field staff involved are navigating with the particular combination of dedication and weary humor that characterizes people who have chosen careers that are simultaneously very important and very difficult. The habitat situation layers conservation urgency on top of the biological complications in ways that make the koala story one of the more poignant in contemporary Australian wildlife management. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Koalas require specific eucalyptus species. Not just eucalyptus generically, but particular species that vary by region, and that individual koalas develop preferences for through early dietary imprinting. A koala moved to an area with the wrong eucalyptus species may fail to recognize available food as food. The dietary flexibility that would allow nutritional substitution is not available in a meaningful way. Habitat that does not contain preferred food species is effectively not habitat. The clearing of eucalyptus woodland across eastern Australia for agriculture and urban development has fragmented koala habitat extensively, creating populations that are small, geographically isolated from other populations, and therefore both genetically vulnerable and unable to naturally recolonize habitat from which they have been lost. The koala's limited mobility, metabolically priced out of long-distance movement on a eucalyptus caloric budget, means that habitat corridors are particularly important for this species, and that their absence has particularly severe consequences for population connectivity. Urban expansion into previously rural eucalyptus woodland creates the specific scenario most familiar to people in affected regions. Koalas attempting to navigate suburban environments, crossing roads, entering gardens, occasionally appearing in situations that are simultaneously charming and dangerous for the animal. Road mortality is a significant cause of koala death in peri-urban areas. Dog attack is another. The koala's defenses, grip strength and claws that are formidable against smaller predators and adequate for deterring most threats in a tree, are poorly matched to the threats present in suburban environments. Particularly domestic dogs that encounter a koala on the ground during the limited time the animal spends moving between trees. The rescue and rehabilitation sector that manages injured, sick, and displaced koalas across eastern Australia is staffed largely by volunteers with extraordinary dedication and limited resources. Managing a caseload that reflects both the health burden of chlamydia and the injury burden of vehicle and dog interactions. The experience of rehabilitating koalas, caring for animals through antibiotic treatment and recovery, managing animals that are in pain and expressing that clearly through vocalization and defensive behavior, providing food in the specific configurations and species that individual animals will accept, and then releasing animals back into habitat that remains fragmented and threatened, is a sustained emotional and physical commitment that produces in the people who do it a specific kind of deeply informed fondness that has nothing in common with the plush toy version. These are people who understand exactly what koalas are, including all of the difficult parts, and who continue caring for them anyway. That is a different and more honest form of appreciation than the kind generated by a photograph of a round, sleepy animal in a eucalyptus tree, and it is worth acknowledging as its own kind of remarkable thing. The question of why koalas are hated, which the title of this video poses directly, is worth examining honestly, because hate is a strong word and the reality is more textured than that framing suggests. Koalas are not widely hated in the general population sense. The global public image of koalas is overwhelmingly positive, and the conservation concern that accompanies awareness of their threatened status in many regions is real and widely felt. The more accurate framing is that koalas are hated in specific situational, contextual ways by specific populations who interact with them under specific conditions. Wildlife handlers hate the grip and the claws. In the specific moment of being gripped and clawed, while simultaneously caring enough about the animal to be there getting gripped and clawed. Veterinary staff hate the therapeutic dilemma of antibiotic treatment and eucalyptus digestion. in the specific frustration of trying to save an animal while the available treatments risk creating different problems. Researchers hate the pace of koala learning in behavioral studies, in the specific way you come to resent an animal that will not cooperate with the experimental design no matter how many times you try. Suburban residents hate the bellow at 3 in the morning during breeding season, in the specific way you hate any sound that wakes you from sleep and will not stop. None of these hates are the kind that produce indifference to koala welfare. They are the hates of people in close relationship with an animal that is demanding, complicated, biologically bizarre, and simultaneously worthy of the considerable effort it requires. The hate and the commitment exist together, which is actually a fairly recognizable emotional configuration in the context of caring for anything that is difficult and important simultaneously. The koala is also, it should be said, doing exactly what it evolved to do, in the environment it evolved to do it in, which is to say it is doing it perfectly well until humans and human landscape modification create the conditions under which its specific adaptations become liabilities. The dietary inflexibility that makes habitat fragmentation so serious for koalas is the same specialization that allowed them to access a food source with essentially no competition. The metabolic conservatism that limits their cognitive flexibility and mobility is what makes the eucalyptus diet viable. The grip strength that surprises handlers is what keeps them in trees through 2-decade lifespans of arboreal sleep. Every difficult thing about koalas is the shadow side of an adaptation that worked for millions of years before the environment changed faster than evolution could follow. That framing does not make the 3 a.m. bellow quieter, or the claw marks heal faster, but it does shift the understanding of what koalas are from broken or badly designed animals to extremely well-designed animals in an environment that has been changed around them in ways that expose the limits of the design they have. The conservation status of koalas was uplisted to endangered in Australia in 2022, reflecting population declines across Queensland, New South Wales, and the Australian Capital Territory that are severe enough to require urgent intervention if the species is to remain viable in those regions. The response from the Australian public and from international conservation communities has been substantial and reflects the genuine affection that exists for koalas at the population level. The plush toy and postcard version of koala appreciation translating into conservation funding and political pressure that has real effects on policy and resource allocation, the people doing the actual work of turning that funding and political will into outcomes on the ground, the field researchers, the veterinary staff, the rehabilitation volunteers, the land managers, the corridor planners, have a more complicated relationship with their subject than the international supporters sending donations do. They know the grip and the claws, they know the bellow, they know the chlamydia treatment dilemma and the eucalyptus species preferences and the cognitive limitations. They know all of it in detail from direct experience. And they are still there, doing the work, which suggests that the complicated version of koala appreciation, the one that includes full knowledge of what koalas actually are, is, if anything, more durable than the simple version. The koala is a fascinating animal, metabolically extreme, neurologically unusual, behaviorally predictable in some dimensions and surprising in others, perfectly adapted to conditions that have been significantly altered, carrying a disease burden that requires sophisticated veterinary intervention to manage, dependent on specific habitat that has been fragmented by the same species now trying to save it, represented to the global public by a curated selection of images that communicate about 15% of what it is actually like. The gap between the postcard and the reality is not a reason to appreciate koalas less. It is a reason to appreciate them more accurately, to understand that the animal sitting in the eucalyptus tree, apparently doing nothing more demanding than existing softly in the afternoon light, is running a biological system of considerable complexity and operating under evolutionary constraints that have shaped every aspect of its existence in ways that take real engagement to understand. And to understand that the ranger with the scratched forearms, the vet navigating the antibiotic dilemma, the volunteer driving 4 hours to collect an injured animal at 2 in the morning, these people have earned a more nuanced relationship with koalas than a postcard allows for, and that the specific, situational, context-dependent resentments they have developed are evidence of closeness rather than distance. You cannot hate something you do not care about. The people who work with koalas most closely feel both things strongly, because koalas, when encountered in their full biological reality rather than their curated public image, turn out to be exactly the kind of animal that produces exactly that response.